Since 2015, we participated or led about 7 midterm evaluation or 8. We did 2 in Guatemala, 2 in Malawi, 2 in Madagascar, 1 in Haiti, and we also participated 1 in Bangladesh. And these projects were awarded at different period of time. And we saw a evolution of different aspects, and that will be, as we present the key common findings, you will see that. One thing that we also, in addition to these midterm evaluations, all of the field work that we do, we visit field, we found very similar finding also through our monitoring visit. So even though these findings that we are presenting come from the midterm evaluation that we conducted, we, in Food for Peace, we are pretty sure that we can generalize these findings across the board. So with that, I'm going to present the findings related to targeting and integration. So the projects that were awarded, in 2012, 2013, when the world was more focused on PM2A. We found that PM2A probably at that time everybody felt that PM2A is the silver bullet. PM2A will help us to reduce stunting in a substantial way. And the projects that were awarded at that time, the targeting was very much directed or directed by the PM2A approach, right? So the projects went there, and then they identified pregnant women, lactating mothers with children under 2, and then that was regardless of their poverty status, that was the driving force. As a result, if you are a poor woman, doesn't fit the criteria, like you are not a pregnant woman, you do not have an under 2 child, you are missed out of targeting. So that's one of the finding that we found, that the projects awarded at that time, the targeting was very much driven by PM2A. Also, in other projects, what we found that the targeting was not always very intentional. So, for example, as we know that the targeting for different sector are different, right? So for maternal child health nutrition, which is still we are, using the 1,000 days window, that the targeting criteria for 1,000 days are different from the targeting criteria for income, the intervention that we implement to improve people's access to food, right? The intervention that will help people to increase income. So in places where we found that while the 1,000 days, targeting was intentional, for income opportunity, the interventions related to income opportunities were more voluntary. Like, the project went to a community and say, hey, we are going to help farmer to increase production. Who would like to participate, right? And the people who volunteered to participate, they participated. So it's not intentional, it's more participatory, which is a good thing. But again, as a result, people who did not volunteer, either because they did not have time or they did not see that they are doing agriculture, they were missed out. We also see that the inconsistencies in targeting across the board. So for example, in some places where the village chief decided, hey, we got this project and we are supposed to be helping people, so we will share the wealth across as many people as we can, right? So as a result, the village chief tried to distribute tried to influence the targeting and tried to share the benefit to as many people as he or she can. While also we saw that the projects, they were targeting purposefully and they were targeting the right group of people. We did not find that the targeting was very much aligned with the theory of change of the project, which in every single cases, the theory of change indicated that the project will be trying to help improve food security of very poor and vulnerable households. And they will create increased access to food. They will improve the utilization of food through improved nutritional practices, improved behavior around wash, and then also improving capacity to better manage shocks. The newer projects that we participated, in midterm, we saw that there were very little inclusion error. So meaning we did not find that the non-poor were included into the target. But still we saw that within the scope of the project, there were exclusion error. Poor people who should have been targeted, they were left out. And I tried to highlight what could be some of the reasons. So given the time, I'm switching to integration. So again, like when you did your problem analysis, as you designed your project, or all of these projects, when they did their problem analysis and then they designed the project, the project was not designed, or at least the project was not implemented when we targeted intervention based on the individual household strengths and needs. So it was generalized that all poor households need this and that. And then when the project went ahead and targeted the intervention, they did not take into account the strengths and the needs of the individual households. Let me give you one example. So for example, let's say that one project decided based on their assets, based on their targeting strategy, based on their capacity and scope, they decided that they're going to target 5,000 poor households, right? And they're going to work on implement agriculture, improve agricultural production, increase their income, improve their nutrition, improve their wash behavior. What happened, instead of first identifying the household and looking at what are their strengths and what are their needs, and then channeling the intervention towards that, the agriculture people took the agriculture intervention, know the targeting criteria, and went up, look for target households, right? The nutrition people took the nutrition intervention and look for people who are poor, and then identify those people. So even though they met the targeting criteria, and then when they offered the intervention, but it was not targeted towards individual households. So as a result, a poor household who needs support on improving income probably did not receive any intervention to improve income. They received probably only intervention to improve their nutrition behavior. So it was not a household-focused approach, rather than intervention-driven approach. And again, if you look at from the outside, yes, did they target very poor household? Yes. Did they target the intervention went to the very poor household? Yes. But it did not, we did not target the intervention based on the needs and the strengths of the individual household. I only highlighted some of the challenges that we faced. There were lots of positive things that we found, and as I started saying that we saw an evolution of improvement. So we came a long way. Even for the past 5 years, we came a long way. But also we recognize that we have a long way ahead of us. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. To follow up on some of the themes that Arif was talking about, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we're implementing projects in terms of what we're actually doing in the field with respect to the types of activities that we're doing. So looking at sort of the complexity, building on Arif talked about how technically we're engaged in the projects and what we're doing beyond the project design stage, and then how we're learning between projects, and then finally going a little bit into social behavior change and some of the themes that we've seen between the last midterm evaluations and some of the reports over the past few years. So partner and beneficiary training, everyone does this. We have a lot of different models for doing this. We know that in order to reach some of the numbers that we believe we need to get and we need to report on, we do a lot of cascade training, but we know that a lot of times that's not directed appropriately. So as Arif talked about, making sure that the targeted intervention was appropriate for the household, we also need to think about how the training is targeted towards the beneficiaries. So a lot of times we might just, train partners or some of our field staff to do training on WASH or something, and they might just have a booklet and they go through all the WASH training. It's not really reflective maybe of the current season and some of the issues the households might be feeling and might be experiencing. So if there's like a diarrhea outbreak, that's not necessarily a training focused on, some of the pathways for diarrhea. So just thinking about how we're doing the training and making sure that not only are they reflective and adaptive and not just rote training week after week or month after month, but they actually are really looking at how we can make them impactful. Project complexity, Arif talked a little bit about this as well. I mean, we know that from the CSIs and how we have changed those over the years, that a lot of partners feel, and I think we heard this yesterday in one of the sessions, that partners feel that they need to do everything, and if it's not listed, that it's not good. And I think that we would say that that's not necessary, that we are maybe doing too much. Maybe we're not focusing correctly and focusing on the right drivers or pathways to some of the issues we're trying to solve. And we need to think about how can we prioritize? What is the real lever that actually might change something, and how can we look at our activities and prioritize those in that manner? This is just an example of one projects and all the different activities that they're doing at one time. I mean, that's a lot to handle. We know on the management side, from the implementing side, that's a lot to handle. It's a lot to train staff. So how can we think about prioritizing those activities over the few years, maybe doing a little bit more of layering and sequencing, but again, really thinking about what is the aspect we want to change and what are the main drivers and levers in order to do that. One of the aspects I think that that Arif brought into some of our midterm evaluations that's been really helpful and useful, and what we think it has been for you all as well, is bringing in some of the headquarters and the partner technical staff to do some of the evaluations with us. That's been a really good, I think, pathway to learn from both sides. So I think for us, it's working with our country backstop officers in Food for Peace to try to make sure that we're not just providing best practices, but we're also advising our staff on how to do programs effectively. But I think looking at the implementing side, how you all are using maybe your headquarter technical staff. Are they actually going out into the field? How often? Or are they doing it specifically, or is it demand driven? So how that's being organized and implemented. Inter-project learning, I think that's another thing. You've been hearing a lot recently, and Joan is a big proponent of this. We all are, about the learning and how are we really adaptively managing our projects and learning. So how do we have those pathways within our organizations and our systems, not just within the activities we're implementing, just looking at the results, but really how are we identifying smaller problems, at the field level, and how are those brought up to higher levels, and so that we can have change, so that we're not coming in 2.5 years to a program and doing an evaluation and seeing a lot of little problems that probably could have been fixed earlier. So what are those adaptive management techniques? Where are those feedback loops within your own organizations that allow for that voice of maybe the field monitor who's seeing something that doesn't make sense to him or her? Systems approaches, this is something that's very much a part of the Food for Peace strategy, and it's something that within USAID writ large we take very seriously. If we're thinking about the administrator's call for self-reliance and we're thinking about sustainability, how do we do that? So if we are building a road, have we included the local ministry of rural rehabilitation or whatever it might be? Is that road on their and they're within their systems. I mean, how are we integrating with those local systems, not creating parallel systems also, but how are we bringing in those partners to think about sustainability, whether those be formal or informal systems. This is sort of the same thing that I was talking about. Again, looking at, we've had a lot of, in Malawi, a lot of the staff are trained on governance issues as well, and that was really something positive that we saw that could help facilitate maybe some of the more technical aspects of their programs. So just thinking about that and incorporating that into the daily implementation. I think Adam will hit on this, so I might skip since I'm getting time. Social behavior change, and this is something that you probably have heard a little bit, definitely from our gender and youth experts, but also our nutrition team, really looking at, thanks, the social behavior model of change. So we talk a lot about SBCC, but what we're seeing is that maybe people are focusing too much on that second C, and so really trying to take a step back and look at what is the action or what is the habit that we're trying to change or have an effect on, whether that's a personal habit or a cultural norm. What are we trying to influence in order that we actually get some positive deviance from the particular issue. So something like the care group model, we're doing a lot where we're bringing people in. How are we making sure that those dialogues, again, are not just rote, the training that the person is supposed to give that week, but it's actually reflective and it's an interactive conversation and not just feedback. So just looking at how we're doing it through the models and making sure that they're interactive, but also looking at what we're trying to teach them, noting that sometimes we're looking, as it says here, 30 different behaviors, which is not really possible. We know that. We know that from our own experience, that's not possible to have sustainability and for people to actually internalize some of that. And counseling, again, just further clarifying the point of who are we looking at. So in this picture, you see a lot of different children, different ages of the children. So what is that training? Who are they actually talking to? Are they talking to the woman with a child that's maybe 3 or 4? Or are they talking to the woman with the baby? So just making sure that we're tailoring those approaches so it actually speaks to that person at that time and is reflective of that. Again, it's something we have heard, and we all know this very well, who are the influencers, and making sure that we're incorporating them on our, in terms of our dialogue and our session plans. And again, making sure that the activities are interactive and engaging all those. We've heard a lot from you all in the field as well. I mean, some of the different types of adult learning methods, singing via song or dancing, whatever is culturally appropriate. And then, but really importantly, again, trying to make sure that it's not just a one-way dialogue, that it's actually a conversation and that the people we're trying to teach can feed that back. So how are we engaging them in the learning process? Learning by doing, we all know that does tend to work better. We're seeing that in some of our projects, but not all of them. And it might be due to just the number of projects that or interventions people are trying to do. It might just be too many, and so we're not putting the quality and the focus on the ones that really are most important. CLTS, Kyla and Nicole, our 2 WASH specialists, have talked to you a lot about this, I'm sure, and will again today, but just looking at sort of a community approach to behavior change, making sure that they're engaged and understand the pathways. I think these are all methods that we know and that we've learned. I think we're not seeing them used consistently in the projects. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's always a pleasure to talk to anybody at a TOPS event. You guys do such a fantastic job. All right, this morning I'm going to be focusing on sustainability, natural resource management, and food for asset strategic planning. I've entitled this The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. All right, overall, I want to start with the framework that we used to look at sustainability was the Food for Peace funded Tufts research on exit strategies. And for a quick reminder, they found that there were 3 and sometimes a 4th factor that were really important for sustainability, and they were motivation, capacity, resources, and sometimes linkages. In general, I would say that every activity that we looked at had major problems with sustainability, despite using a variety of different approaches. There were, of course, some notable successes, there were some notable failures, and there were some serious issues where we actually found some projects were doing more harm than good. This is the Underpants GNOME Sustainability Plan. So for those of you who don't know this is from an American TV show called South Park, which is set about 9-year-old children. And in one episode, these little gnomes, these little guys at the bottom there, are stealing all the children's underwear. And the children follow them back to their sort of cave where they live. And they're like, why are you taking our underwear? And they present this business plan, which is steal underplants, question mark, success, basically profit, right? And so sometimes in the field, we saw some sustainability plans that were remarkably similar to this. So if you have a question mark in the middle of your sustainability plan, you may want to rethink your approach. All right, the good, and there was significant good that we found. One of them was the private sector service provider model, which is a model that has a lot of promise. I'd like to see some more research on it because it's not really proven in my mind. But the fact is that's who's there in the field when we leave. They're the private sector people are there. So you like that. Using government services when capable and when have the capacity and the ability to do service delivery also is a good one. Having profitable producer groups that have the profit motive behind them to keep functioning also was a good thing. We saw some high quality training, which was mentioned earlier also, where they were using proper adult learning methodologies, which TOPS is great at, which we are not so good at. The village savings and loan model is widely adopted throughout the world by millions of people now and has proven to be effective and sustainable in many ways. We saw some great linkages, both to feed the future in some cases and also the private sector. And the community engagement was incredible. As you all know, you work very closely with the communities all over the world, and that is very much appreciated. All right. The bad. We found that there was some limited coverage issues at the community level. Some of this gets back to what Arif and Elizabeth were talking about. Food for Peace measures its impact based on population-based surveys. So if you're only impacting a few households in a community, we won't see the change in our own evaluation. If we don't see the change, how are we going to know what we did? We have found a heavy reliance on volunteers to deliver services. Not only do you get poor quality services from volunteers, the sustainability, what is the motivation, the resource, and the capacity of these folks to keep providing services after the project is done? I mean, as Arif always says, would you do your job for free? You know, so that's always the way that I look at these things too. We also find that many of the most vulnerable are actually excluded from those profitable producer groups because they lack the land or resources to be engaged in them. We found that the VSA loans are more often than not used for very short-term financial gain, arbitrage, and those kinds of things, buying a goat for 5 whatever and selling it for 7 whatever, right? Rather than long-term sustainable building enterprises. And we found that within certain sectors, long-term sustainability systems thinking was absent. So for example, in seed systems, in water systems, in service delivery of all types, that there was not enough systematic thinking about how to set up a system that would continue delivering high-quality goods, products, or services over time. We found that within the training sessions, there was a variability of quality and approach, even within an individual activity, so that showed that some of the field staff were not equally capable of delivering the training. The ugly, and this is the worst part of what we found that in some cases there was actually a creation of dependency upon government, US government handouts. In other words, creating a fostering an environment of entitlements rather than investments. We found that people in some cases actually had given up previous livelihoods because they were now receiving free food and things like that from us. That there was insufficient attention to operation and maintenance costs of the infrastructure we were setting up oftentimes, and that in the DRR section that there was a lack of linkages and information flow from down to up was good, but from up to down often wasn't good. So people would feed all this information into these systems we were setting up, they would go up to the authorities that be, and then nothing would happen, and the people were angry about that often. We also found that most efforts on sustainability were falling short of what we wanted to see from the Tufts framework. To quote the Tufts framework, hope is not a strategy. In other words, that question mark in the sustainability strategy really needs to be fully thought out. All right, now we're going to do a quick zoom through 3 sectors. The first one is natural resource management. The good was that most of the people I've spoken to in the field all over the world fully understand that climate change is happening and that it's a bad thing. They don't fully understand the impacts of it, or if they've said, for example, often people think that if you plant trees, the rain will come. That is simply, of course, not the way that works. There was some high-quality natural resource management training we saw. On the bad side, there was quite a few free inputs, giving away free seedlings of trees and things like that, and then some people were, in fact, paid to plant trees on their own land, which is an entitlement, not an investment methodology. We found some poor implementation. We have photos of this coming up, with both tree and climate-smart agriculture, mulching that wasn't quite right, composting that wasn't quite right, planting trees unstrategically. And the ugly was the general lack of strategic approach to doing natural resource management right. And one of the ways to do that is the watershed approach, but that was used in a few activities, but not in all of them. On the food or cash for assets, we found that they were oftentimes working on high productive infrastructure, and that there were some cases where there was extremely good governance set up to manage those resources. The bad was that there was typically a lack of professional engineering design and oversight of the construction sites, leading to sometimes poor quality construction. And the ugly, again, was the lack of general strategic approach between different sites, and also the project decided priorities rather than the individual decided priorities. All right, the good. So here's some linkages. This is a great bean field on the left, and on the right is the usage of manure from a raised pen to apply to that exact same bean field. On the good side, human capital, we have a VSLA on the left, and on the right we have a farm producer organization. So they're really building the capacity of these people to solve their own problems, which is great. We have some excellent NRM food for assets here. On the left, we have a wall that was built from a project that has long ended, and it is still functioning. You can see the grass growing along the side of it is doing exactly as it was intended to do. On the right, we have the only thing the project provided in this particular case was the bags that the seedlings are in. Everything else, including the structure that they're growing them in, the seedlings themselves, the soil in the bags, was all provided by the people. The people in this particular case also had an extensional sustainability plan and strategic plan of where to plant those trees, divided by the community, for the community, after capacity building by the activity. That was great. The bad, we have an old water filtration system that had been turned into a potted plant. It's nice to have a potter, but we would hope that sustainability built into that. And on your right, there is an extension agent doing the work in front of everybody else, not doing adult learning by doing, but rather a demonstration, which we know not to be as effective. The bad, on the left, we have, you can't really see that, but there's a bunch of holes there, and it was just a line of trees going off into the distance, seemingly planted just because they could, rather than for any strategic purpose. And on the right, there is a road that is still being constructed, and it's already eroding at the beginning part of it. The ugly is on your left. That is a sustainability strategy. If your sustainability strategy has a few arrows and some clouds on it, it's probably not a sustainability strategy. And on the right, we have the Cadillac of food storage systems. That is a hermetically sealed steel system. It is fantastic and very expensive, and it is just lying around because nobody's using it. Targeting issues there, obviously, because the people who were given it did not need it. The ugly, Arif said that we didn't have many inclusion errors of people who weren't poor. That was true by and large, but these are two examples where we actually did. This particular beneficiary not only had a concrete floor, but they also had a refrigerator with electricity mains, and this other house had piped water and electricity as well. All right, I think at that point, we are now to the end of our talking session, and we are happy to, I think, accept questions from the audience.
All right, so please do remember that we are live streaming this and recording it, so if you do have a question, please wait until the microphone comes to you. We have one right here.
I like the question mark because what I have observed, because I'm Vijaya from USAID Nepal, so I visit field so many times, very often, and so what I felt is that what we are doing is we as development and humanitarian professionals think that we know everything because we are expert. And so we make plans by ourselves, assuming that these poor and vulnerable households, they need this and this. We know from Washington, we know from mission in any country, and we know from the implementing partners level that we know everything, yes? So we make plan, and then we implement, we do our interventions, like Arif said. And then we also play with the data, because we monitor, we do the demonstration in the households that they apply these technologies, yeah. And then we again plan based on our data. So is it the time to change ourselves? This social behavior change and communication, does that apply to ourselves as well? We also have to be, think about the target groups with whom we are working, whether we know them well or not, and stop assuming that we know them well and we plan ourselves. So I think that is the question for all of us.
Okay, my name is Abdul Rahman. I'm from USAID, Pakistan. My question is that, okay, now we have the results, we have the analyses and midterm evaluation. Are we comparing these results or analyses with other donors funded program with the same objectives, with the same outcomes or outputs? Are they having the same problem which we are facing as one of the donors community? So I think we have also to see that if that's the problem across the board, then we all have to sit together along with other donors that whether our targeting has a problem or problem lies at somewhere at the governance level or at the community level. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Sarita from KSAsia18.
Can you just hold off, Sarita? I think Arif would like to respond. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Abdul Rahman. The question that you raised is a very good question. We did not sit down with other donors to find out whether they have similar issues, but we know that the issues, because all these evaluations that were done, that were together with the partner, it's not only Food for Peace went there. So it was a collaborative effort, and we all realized that this is a problem, and we also are seeing an improvement. One thing which is important to recognize that the midterm evaluation is a process evaluation. It doesn't really, the primary focus is not to look at the output or outcome. The primary focus is to look at whether the training, the way it should be done, whether they are done that way. Whether the demonstration plot, the way it should be done, whether those were done that way. Whether the demonstration plot is located in a strategic location. So these are the problems that are against the proposed project design. So the observation that the midterm evaluation team made are the gaps that we all recognized, and the partners already started to work on it and improving the situation. Thank you for your suggestion. Probably we will go back and we will sit down with other donors as well. And similarly, our partners are also probably in a much better position than us, because they not only work with Food for Peace, they work with many other donors. So they are already probably know that whether this is a isolated situation only in Food for Peace development program or across the board. Thank you.
Sarita?
Good morning. This is Sarita from Nepal. My question is, I think the targeting has given us a good progression, but how will these findings that you have just presented be integrated in the upcoming calls? For example, like imposed plan to minimize exclusion of the vulnerable group. So how will these be integrated? It will be interesting.
Thank you. That's a very good comment. It is. So, for example, we see it is a shared responsibility. So, in Food for Peace side, after every single midterm evaluation, we go back and we make changes to RFA. After the first evaluation, we went back and we added point for sustainability strategy, because we felt that unless we do that, the applicants might not be, put adequate emphasis on sustainability strategy. So for every single evaluation, Food for Peace go back and then make changes to the RFA. And similarly, you will see, in future RFA, things are getting better to address these challenges. But equally, we expect, and we are seeing already, that the partners are also shoring up their strategy to address some of those concerns as well. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Rafiq from Bangladesh Navajatra Project. I have a questions to the panel that, as you saw, these good, bad, ugly, and also the targeting issues. So during your visit, did you check whether the existing M&E system identified already all those or not?
In some cases, yes. The M&E system already identified those. Even in some cases, we saw that the partners' headquarters staff identified some of the challenges that where we, as a team, when the same person were part of the team, that, that individual told the midterm evaluation team that I already identified those, and they shared the report with us. What happens, sometimes an individual's voice didn't get heard, right? So even though those were identified, those were not taken seriously by the project management team to address them. I'm not generalizing this. I'm just giving you, examples. So yes, sometimes those were identified by the M&E system, sometimes those were identified by the technical staff of the partner headquarters, but sometimes those were addressed to some extent. Other cases, those were not addressed. Those were not taken seriously. Thank you.
If I can add to something. I think that's why we, a couple of questions here have already talked about where in the process do we need to change? Well, we need to change at our level. So we are. I mean, if you look at the RFAs over the past couple of years, they've changed significantly. And so we are learning, and we're learning that part of that, the onus is on us to change how we're designing the projects from our side, from the donor perspective. But I think what I was mentioning in my presentation that Arif was just talking about is what are the internal feedback loops that you have within your organization so that everyone, especially the people on the field that are seeing it on a day-to-day basis, that they do have that voice and that is heard and recognized, because some of the issues had already been found, but there hadn't been any change made. So how are we all learning and adapting and being intentional in terms of ensuring that those feedback loops are not just there, but that they're acted upon?
Hi, I'm Jim Hazen from CRS Madagascar. I just had a question about, we didn't hear much about the commodity component, and I feel like half of our program, even our value and our time, is focused on that, and kind of looking at any thoughts you have on how the targeting, because a lot of the targeting is also related to distributions and who should be targeted. So you often use that as kind of a base for where you start and then where you add things, etc. And I'm just wondering if any of your findings have any implications on your thoughts towards targeting related to commodities, whether it's for food for assets, whether it's for the nutrition piece, because kind of thinking about how you target while you're also reaching those people with those commodities. And second, just real quick, and I don't know, maybe Adam can answer this, and I know it's midterm you're referring to, but one thing that we've recognized is that a lot of the NRM activities, you're not really seeing the benefits for maybe several years, even beyond the program. Because whether it's trees, whether it's dams, whether it's, you're kind of seeing, it takes some time for those things to progress. And I'm just wondering, you showed an example of like a wall that was built, I think, during a previous program that you ended up seeing during a midterm now, but any thoughts on how you might look at things like NRM in a midterm versus maybe looking at those later? I'm just kind of wondering how you might look at those, because I think it's sometimes difficult to measure progress towards NRM at certain levels when it's just the beginning of a tree sapling or some other NRM activity. Thanks.
So the targeting, so the commodity has two components. One is the management, commodity management, and one is the other part is who is getting the commodities and what they're doing with that. We did not, all of the evaluation that we participated or we did not have a commodity specialist in our team. So we could not look at the commodity management part of it, but we did look at the commodity, who is receiving it. And again, as I was presenting during the targeting session, or my talk about targeting, that over time, the targeting, like the projects that were awarded in 2012-13, those were very much geared towards PM2A. So the people who were receiving, they included very wealthy people. People have 4x4 received our commodity. People has a swimming pool in their house received our commodity, right? But then if you move more towards projects that were awarded in 2014-15, the targeting has improved. And so over time, the targeting is improved, and regardless whether they're receiving commodity as a 1,000 days package or for the food for asset or cash for asset part. Thank you.
I would add to that. I mean, in some of the projects we've also seen in terms of the inclusion, women that are 5 and 6 months pregnant that had told the field monitor, months before, I'm pregnant, and just because of the delays in reporting from the field monitor to the system that might be at a sub-regional center back to the capital, that all of that takes so much time that people are not being included and brought into the programs as quickly as they should be. So again, it's about how flexible and adaptive can we be, and how quick are we able to make changes and issue those modifications that are slight but actually have a huge impact on the people we're trying to reach.
Thanks for the question on natural resource management. That is a good question. The thing with looking at current existing natural resource management efforts that are started now, you're right that you're not going to see the dividends immediately. In some cases you can, depending on what it is. So what we look at is quality of implementation in that case, right? Like, is the engineering done properly? And oftentimes you can tell this immediately when you look at something. If it's a rock wall, is it tied into the sides? If it's something on a riverbank strengthening, are there strips in the middle of the river to slow the water down and so forth, you know, to make sure that the infrastructure itself is built properly? And are there systems in place to maintain those structures as well, you know, operations and maintenance? And then also, is there a plan behind the interventions? That's what I was trying to get at with the strategic approach. Is there a reason why you're planting trees there? Is there a reason why you're building walls there? Does it all add up to something bigger than the sum of its parts? Because in watershed management, the idea is that you manage at a strategic level of an entire watershed, or depending on the country, and sometimes those watersheds can be huge, so at least a micro or sub-watershed, where you manage the whole thing for the benefit of everybody living in the upper watershed, lower watershed, and then the downstream, in fact. So all of those strategic approaches can and should be done before any rock is moved or any tree is planted. It should be planted for a purpose that is identifiable and verifiable, and then also will, in fact, have a buy-in from the local community, so hopefully driven by their own needs as well. Is that a good answer?
And I think I'll add to that too. I mean, a lot of the changes, especially when you're looking at the ecological system or the watershed, I mean, most of these populations have seen these changes over time, I mean, within their own generation. So they know what happened when all the trees were cut down and the soil started to erode, and they've seen how the water flows affected some of their downstream actions. So, I mean, I think when you know, we all have that process of engaging the community, but really trying to get them to identify historically what was here, what problems did you not have, and why are you having them now, and maybe, you know, trying to make those linkages a little more explicit. I mean, it's, you know, NRM it can be short or long term in terms of the benefits, but I mean, I think that we can try to make those connections, and I would say from the woman from Nepal that you know, let's give them a little more credit, but we need to help make those connections.
We have time for one more succinct question. I'd like the patient gentleman in the back there.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Effendi from Indonesia. My question is probably related to how can we integrate more effectively of the monitoring evaluations to the executions of the project? How can we move further from just making M&E as a checklist of activities and output to the better information to allow the implementation willingly to change substantially if we really need to change? So in the state, well, often we ugly to say that, sadly to say that we treat M&E as then a checklist, and then we would like to do a pony show when the M&E come. And how can we become more transparent and honest to say that, yeah, there's something significantly ineffective in this implementation, and how much we are willing to change. And so to say that how much we are more effective to integrate M&E to the implementation of the project, and then that will lead us more effectively to the project result. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. So when we say M&E, we oftentimes mean the quantitative numbers. And that should not be only the main, you know, when we say that M&E for program improvement. So every single project has a technical team. And we found that the technical team is often busy with providing training, which is one of their main responsibility, technical training to their staff, as well as developing guidance, which is also a responsibility of the technical team. But one thing which they could really be instrumental to review the way midterm evaluation team visit communities, visit training session, sat down and see how the training is going on. Technical team can provide enormous information to the project management team that how the quality of implementation is happening, and that feedback can be then used to improve program quality. So that's definitely one way to integrate M&E to improve program quality. Also, like we always think about, because still the M&E or the indicator, the quantitative part of M&E is probably driven by the donor. So one thing which we do not understand, what Food for Peace requires indicators, that's based on our strategic need, our reporting need. They do not necessarily reflect the project management's information need, fully require, right? So the project management should design an M&E which will fulfill the need for reporting need to the donor. Like the way we collect data, we also look at what report we have to submit to the Congress, we have to submit to Feed the Future. So that drive us, what information do we need? A project management team should think about what other information do we need in order to better manage our project. One classic example is, for example, many of our projects build road, right, or repair road. And the only indicator we have for road, which is an expensive intervention, is kilometers of road built or rehabilitated. While just think about that building a road which links a community to a village or community to a maybe market, to a growth center, has a huge, enormous benefit, right? And we don't often capture that. We don't capture because that's not required by donor. So I think those are the project should think about what information do they need to better manage and improve the quality of program, as well as to be able to tell that story to everybody else, not so much focused on what the donor is requiring, because the donor is requiring the information based on the donor's strategic reporting need, not necessarily based on the need for the project managers. Thank you.